Hello, Biblionics. This is Griggs, among other things, and let's take you through some of my thoughts and other readings that I was doing on the side as I was reading War and Peace. This is probably going to be my last commentary on War and Peace and on Tolstoy, potentially, but not the last video. I'll make also a video reading my favorite passages from the book. So first I read this. I did say on the previous video that I never loved anything from Isaiah Berlin. He never wrote anything great. Maybe I should pull back that comment and leave it on standby until I read the book of his that I haven't read, that many of my friends believe to say that it is his best book, which is his biography of Karl Marx. When I read that, I'll get back to you on my opinions about him, but so far it's just like, as often is the case with his trains of thought and arguments, and as it's also the case with Tolstoy's view of history, I only see false dichotomies. And thoughts that, in their execution they are good, but the actual contents, their premises, are flawed. So it doesn't really bring me to any plausible agreement or revelation or anything like that. In this case, apart from like the parallelisms that he makes between Tolstoy and Joseph de Maistre, I believe is the name, or other authors, and about like his own talks about the actual book of War and Peace, the main thing in the book is actually contained in the title, which is, this saying that the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog only knows one very important or very big thing. And through that, he then separates different authors. For example, in hedgehogs, you have Dostoevsky, you have Plato. In foxes, you have Aristotle and Diderot, for example. And then this is basically going to lead him to the claim that Tolstoy is an exception to this. He defies that rule that he's created, in the sense that, this is gonna fall. In the sense that Tolstoy is a fox that wants to know one very big thing, right? In the sense that Tolstoy, like he's doing these overarching narratives where he talks about many separate things, and he's like up and down and wants to know it all. But also he is trying to create like one big meta narrative that he can sort of rely on, that being, his Christianity or whatever you want, or his view of history, things like that. Yeah, so good, recommended. However, recommended especially because of the length. It's not a massive waste of your time. I don't think that you're going to read here anything that is going to be like, oh my god, loved it. If you did love it, if I'm not giving justice to this book, please let me know in the comments, because it's not like I didn't pay as much attention to this book precisely because from the beginning I was like, I'm reading an essay based on false premises, and the execution is okay, but it's not Tolstoy. Just let me know in the comments, what do you think about what I just said? Then, I have some notes here because I have quite a few things I want to say. But first, talking about false dichotomies, Tolstoy posits himself against other authors like Carlyle or Walter Benjamin, right? And historians in general, who see history as the product of the will of great men, right? And as the product of a motion, a historical movement, time motion, created by individuals and their wills and their positions and their power. Those are keywords. And as opposed to that, he presents, his own form of historical determinism that, as we will touch upon, is not really his. And by explaining how one extreme it fails to actually represent reality, and especially through this mythification of the figure of the genius of Napoleon, which I don't know if Tolstoy's determinism was actually like something he believed before Napoleon, or he actually hated Napoleon first and then chose to argue that Napoleon was not a genius and therefore historical determinism, so that he can arrive at the conclusion that Napoleon cannot claim any merit for his won battles. I know that many people, Tolstoy included, and I think probably most people because of Tolstoy, thinks that Napoleon was a really bad, really bad in his strategic skills and everything. I don't know much about history or war strategy to give my opinion on that. He does make a very compelling case for why Napoleon was really just like a like a child with a AK-47. Absolutely no logic behind his decisions. Absolutely no forward thinking or anything like that. He does first sort of like elevate the figure of Napoleon, but it's only really to like see him fall throughout the book, to bury him under the carpet, and he is the character that he uses in order to make this case of clearly history, because of Napoleon, clearly history is not the product of the will of great men, but of the combined wills of all the individuals of a society. And every single individual does not have an individual will either, because this sort of like motion is determined. That's the historical determinism. There is no such a thing as individual freedom, which you can already see how this relates to Hegel. And then the way that he continues to develop this argument is through the concept of power. Basically what he's saying is like, how is this one guy going to overrule and dominate a billion other individuals in terms of power? And that's, quantifiably, in terms of quantity of willpowers, that might make sense in his own line of argument. Then he takes that one step further and to justify the outcomes of certain battles in which the less overcome the many, or something like that. He attaches a certain moral to power. Certain battles might be won or lost because of the moral, because morality does increase the power of a certain side over the other. And I think that being said, I think that you don't need my help to show why, as I said at the beginning of the video, this is a false dichotomy. I think the most obvious answer would be to say that, okay, so basically what you're saying, and he does actually explicitly say this, a governor is the expression, the embodiment of the combined willpowers of the people, of the citizens of a country. And also, every single individual is a representation of the greater idea of that country, right? Now, there's two ways in which that could be refuted. The more obvious way is just start naming leaders throughout history that made massive changes and that did not represent their societies. If you are watching this from the US, I don't think you would agree with me. I don't think you would agree that someone like Donald Trump represents the power, the combined willpowers of his nation. I don't think that he embodies the idea of the United States, right? And yet he had power, and he still has a lot of power, but he had power over the whole nation. He could have started a war if he wanted. So something like that, we don't even need to go back to like Hitler or other dictatorships in the past. Something like that, so present and so recent, is more than enough to refute the whole theory, because he's not being relativistic here. He's speaking on general terms and not allowing for any exceptions. No individual has freedom in this sense. That we are all sort of like bounded within this interconnected collective power that is the result of combined wills in going in one single direction. Another reason, another way of refuting this is like, there is a paragraph here which is funny in itself, because he starts talking about like specific characters, right? And I do agree that to a certain degree, nations have like certain personalities that are sort of like, or ideals that are generalized in their societies. But he's talking about in these terms about like Germans, and in order to criticize a certain general that has a methodology of thinking that Tolstoy doesn't agree with. But let's just look at the way he speaks in these terms of like people, individual people, as part of their nation. He says, Prince Andrew, well, if you have this edition, is page 706. Prince Andrew was able to draw on his experience at Austerlitz and use this brief encounter with Pfuel to form a clear impression of the man's personality. Pfuel, I don't really know how to pronounce that, was one of those hopelessly opinionated, arrogant men who would go for the stake of their own ideas, self-assured as only a German can be. Because only a German could be self-assured on the basis of an abstract idea, science. The supposed knowledge of an absolute truth. A Frenchman is self-assured because he sees himself as devastatingly charming, mentally and physically, to men and women alike. An Englishman is self-assured on the grounds that he is a citizen of the best organized state in the world. And also because an Englishman, as he always knows, the right thing, and because as an Englishman he always knows the right thing to do, and everything he does, because he is an Englishman, he must be right. An Italian is self-assured because he gets excited and easily forgets himself and everybody else. And a Russian is self-assured because he knows nothing and doesn't want to know anything, because he doesn't believe you can know anything completely. Then he goes back into the critique of the Germans. But basically here, what he's reducing these sort of like individuals into sort of like a massified generalization, a stereotype that we would see as an stereotype, but in his own view of history, in his own belief of like, separate wills all coming together, and nations and governors being the expression of those common wills, I don't think that he is talking in these terms, thinking of stereotypes. I think he's talking in these terms, thinking of every single person, including himself, trapped within these stereotypes. And if we look at what he says about Russians, he knows nothing. A Russian knows nothing and doesn't want to know anything anyways, because believes that nothing can be known completely. Now, that is contradictory with both the theorizing that he does throughout this book, also with the idea of, it's against theorizing in general, it's against science, is basically like a conformism that would allow us to arrive to no knowledge at all. But also, thousands of pages that this man has written on self-referential stuff, right? You could say that in itself is also a refutation. Like, why are you dedicating so much effort to your single individual experience when you don't really exist, right? As Hegel says in the Phenomenology, I'm but a product of my time. I'm just the result of a series of cycles in history. That's what allows him to say arrogant things and speak as if he was holding the truth. The fact that he's just the result of a greater history, just the last piece on the puzzle. I know that like someone like Tolstoy with this kind of theory could answer to this question, saying that the abstract forces that guide history are expressed in individuals as well. They have to have their own evident, tangible manifestation in the real world. That's a way in which he would answer. Still, I think that does not really solve the point of like this being a false dichotomy. I think that in the moment you can think of a single example of a single individual that did something, that changed something, and did not represent the will of the masses or the historical moment or the era or anything like that. At the moment you don't see how this logic is consistent without an exception, the whole thing falls apart. Just like the arguments for determinism within physics fall apart in the moment that something like quantum theory exists. If like the argument for determinism in one second. Yeah. If determinism, sorry, I just got a notification. If the argument in physics for determinism is that because you can predict the movement of a certain particles in general, normal particles, they move in a certain order, right? So if you put them in a limited space, you can see the movement and predict where they're gonna go next. Now, We are just a combination of particles. So technically then, if you had a computer that was smart enough and could predict the movement of every single particle in our bodies, our lives could be predicted to the very last, to the minutest detail. Now, that's theoretically correct. That's why so many people has jumped into the belief of determinism, although I think that compatibilism is the ultimate answer, which doesn't really matter if your future could be predicted. There is a difference between prediction and determination. Like, the fact that something can be predicted does not mean that it's determined. And I think the linguistics are playing a role there as well. And I also think that at the end of the day, like if someone is pointing at you with a gun, forcing you to shoot someone else, but you actually want to shoot that person, then the moral charge is still on you, because you were shooting because you wanted to shoot, not because someone was pointing to you with a gun. So I don't see how this argument in itself would hold. But also, if there's quantum theory, if there are particles that cannot, their movement cannot be predicted, and there are, and not only that, but most of what we know about the universe, we don't even have a theory about. Most of the matter that exists in the universe, we can't see. We just name it dark matter, but we don't really know what it is. Same thing with energy. But apart from that, like if there are, and we have examples of particles that have a certain kind of movement that cannot be predicted, then nothing can be predicted, because in the moment you have one single exception to that rule, because particles influence each other, the whole scheme of the whole logic of determinism for me falls apart. That's kind of like what I would say against this topic. But also, going back to history, it's a false dichotomy, because he has a point. There are predictable events in history, and there have been moments in history in which a certain popular sentiment in the masses was expressed into a single person that took power and enacted that sentiment. So there are such a things as moments that are inevitable and that are brought forward not by that person, but that person just being an expression of the times. But equally, and otherwise, we would not be moving forward. There is such a thing as genius. There is such a thing as the will of an individual man overpowering the masses. There is such a thing as privilege and difference between different powers. Not all will powers are the same, just like not all minds are the same, and you know that. And I think that's the ultimate answer to Tolstoy's view of history. But it becomes repetitive. It's clear from the beginning its flaws. As with most arguments, you can tell that they are right or wrong way before they start being developed. Especially with wrong arguments, because they tend to be wrong in the premises. So way before they start making the argument, you have to overlook those premises in order to indulge them in their rationalizing of this flawed idea. I could do a textual analysis of some chapter if anyone is interested, so that we actually look at Tolstoy and what he's saying, and like look at, I can do the P1, P2, and look at the premises, and then show you how this one is flawed because the third one is based on a false premise or something like that. But I think that sometimes, and this is something that the Greeks got right and then we forgot, intuition is actually a really good form of it's a really good thing to listen to when it comes to acquiring knowledge and listening to logical fallacies. Most of the times, if someone is saying something that sounds wrong to you, it's probably going to be wrong. There are also counterintuitive truths, but this is not the case. If you agree with Tolstoy, though, do let me know in the comments. He, as it is the case with Isaiah Berlin, but more on Tolstoy, he is still worth listening to and reading for the execution. I think it's also a good way to get to, if you don't want to watch Hegel's lessons on history or read his phenomenology, you are here. This is all Hegel. Now, thinking twice, I think that Tolstoy did not only read Hegel, but I don't have the work, I don't have the time to search and find specifically which extracts and then go to the phenomenology. But I would not be surprised if some parts of this book were just literal extracts that he just put in there and paraphrased from Hegel's phenomenology or his lessons on history. No individual freedom, and yeah, just like events being a manifestation of the whole. Those two things, which are the basis of his argument, the inexistence of genius as well, all of those things, they were there before Tolstoy. He was just using them. I really think that he just took sides when it comes to his philosophy of history, because he really did not like Napoleon. And I can understand why, for all I know about Napoleon. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm starting to ramble. I think this is, I've arrived to a dead end, and it's a good moment to say I'll see you on the other side. Thank you, Booktooth.